I'm just going to be a rather bad storyteller and jump to the end of this review, spoiling my overall thoughts of it. I can't say that I loved The Lion King 2019, finding it a rather emotionally vapid experience, which I'm sure comes as little surprise to those of you that have followed me for any length of time. A lot of my thoughts about The Jungle Book and Aladdin I could echo in this review. But, just because this film didn't work for me overall does not mean that there weren't a fair number of elements that I can sincerely compliment. First off, at this point in cinema history, I feel as if it's becoming more and more common just to completely disregard, or at least downplay, what an outstanding technical achievement a film like this really is. What director Jon Favreau and his creative team were able to pull off with their computer-generated environments and creatures was absolutely incredible, and was no small thing. It took time, energy, and heaps of creativity, not just to pull off a remarkably photorealistic aesthetic, but to infuse that with such veracity. It was just so clear that endless amounts of research had been done, from the movement of a lion, to a hyena, to a meerkat, to a warthog, from the textures of bark to the color of soil. And all of it done in this really sincere effort to transport me into that world as much as possible. Honestly, some of my favorite moments in this film were the ones where Jon Favreau really was able to go off book, so to speak, forgetting that this was based upon a pre-existing film which he clearly so often felt obligated to slavishly recreate, and instead made it feel like I was watching the world's most incredible nature documentary. These moments where his digital camera, with their carefully chosen digital lenses, were able to just drift across this perfectly lit African plain, or follow around some of its varied and beautiful native wildlife. I will give Favreau this as well. There were a handful of scenes, ones that were directly lifted from the 2D film, in which he was able to bring some fresh and unique life. And he was able to accomplish this through some really great visual storytelling, creatively employing specific camera angles, lighting and color choices, and music to communicate the story and the emotion driving it, which, for the most part, really were the only tools at his disposal in telling this story, because every one of his quote-unquote lead actors, vocal performances aside, really couldn't emote at all. But we'll talk about that more in just a moment. One of the characters' scenes who did quite often work for me, for the reasons I just described, was Scar's scenes. Chiwetel Ejiofor's vocal performance was about as different to Jeremy Irons' as you could get, and consequently, actually complemented what the filmmakers on this film were trying to do. Ejiofor's subdued snark and subtle craftiness made the subdued and subtle animation feel intentional and, more importantly, understandable. When it came to other stand-up vocal performances, I thought that Billy Eichner as Timon and Seth Rogen as Pumbaa also did great jobs. With them, though, what was great wasn't necessarily that their vocal performances matched all that well with what the animators were doing. It was just that they really were the only characters that were able to capture Favreau's very loose, improvisational directorial style and just surprise me with their lines and line deliveries. There were numerous instances that I was genuinely laughing out loud at their fresh antics. And that really is where my enjoyment ended. Again, most of the elements that I'm about to describe weren't horrible or even all that off-putting, they were just empty. And a good portion of this feeling came from this epiphany that I had while watching the film, one that may or may not offend hardcore animal lovers. That being, facially, animals are rather boring. No, not their looks. Those are varied and beautiful and creative and interesting, but rather how they emote, or rather don't emote. So, being that Favreau and company were so bent on making this film as photoreal and as naturalistic as they possibly could, that meant that nearly every one of the close-ups of his cast's faces told me little to nothing about what they were thinking or feeling, and there were a lot of close-ups in this film, which meant, apart from the previously praised moments where the filmmakers were able to use cinematic language or more expressive animal body language to tell me the story, I really was left in the dark as to what was happening narratively and emotionally. What made this uniquely egregious on this film, though, came from the fact that, for the most part, the filmmakers stubbornly stuck so closely to the original source material, a film which really does zoom along, very rarely needing to stretch out scenes, moments, or beats, because the medium of 2D animation is allowed to be so expressive and so emotive. A viewer, even a young one, can very quickly intuit what's happening narratively and emotionally throughout that film. At a glance, it's crystal clear what Simba is feeling in this moment. and in this one, or what Scar is plotting in this one, or how Mufasa feels about his son in this one. In contrast, just looking at the face, which was held on for the same amount of time in this film, I really have no clue what's going on in this character's mind, or in this one, or in this one. So, was this film some abomination? No. Of course not. It still has the same characters, the same music, and the same story as an absolute classic. But unfortunately, like nearly every one of Disney's live-action remakes, it forgets that those characters, that music, and that story was specifically designed for 2D animation. And adapting it well will take much more than throwing on it a coat of live-action paint. And for all these reasons, I will give the film a 3 out of 5. I would still love to know what you guys thought of the film though, so definitely comment below and let me know. And finally, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.